Hey everyone, it's Greg from Six Sided Discs. This is Flight Numbers Don't Matter, and today's video is sponsored by Idio Sports. More about them later in the episode. And for this episode of Flight Numbers Don't Matter, we are going back to a comparison that we tried to do over a year and a half ago on overstable approach discs. And this time, we're going big. 30 overstable approach discs from across the disc golf spectrum are going to be put to the test by me. And of course, the goal is to find out which one is the most accurate and consistent, for me at least. But before we get to our test, I want to be the first to admit that I'm not perfect and I make mistakes. The title of that video we did in April of 2023, and quite a few ideas behind it, revolved around how the Discraft zone really changed the game for overstable approach discs, and how nearly every single company now makes a zone clone. But the Discraft zone is arguably not the first overstable approach disc. The Latitude 64 Cenis was approved by the PDGA 2 years before the zone in 2006. But the origins of the overstable approach disc probably more directly trace themselves back to the Innova Rhino. The Rhino was approved by the PDGA in November of 1998, and while many people use it as a putter, it is perhaps one of a very small number of discs that performs equally well as a putter and approach disc. In the last 25 years, overstable approach discs have become an essential disc in every player's bag. Now, wherever the overstable approach disc has come from, it's gone a long way to making players feel confident on the course. And another thing that affects your confidence on the course is the right pair of shoes. And that is where today's sponsor comes in, Idio Sports. The Idio Syncrasy is the only shoe designed specifically for disc golf. Until now. But more on the new Brawler in just a moment. The Syncrasy weighs in at only 12 ounces, keeping you light on your feet during those long tournament days. And with over 600 5-star reviews and a 4.6 overall rating, the Syncrasy is a sure thing. When I bought these Syncrasys in December of 2023, I used their online size guide and got the perfect size the first time. And nearly a year later, they are still in great condition, having already lasted longer than all my 3 previous pairs of hiking shoes. Idio Sports is excited to announce that their new high-top shoe, the Brawler, is available for pre-order right now. The Brawler builds on the success of the Syncrasy. While both are waterproof, the Brawler features a Sympatex liner that prevents water and dew from getting in your shoe on those wet morning rounds. The Brawler's Adapt-A-Brace is durable but flexible and provides enhanced support for your ankle. Plus, the new quick lacing system with built-in pocket for extra slack allows you to tighten your shoes in an instant with no strings to trip on. The Brawler is estimated to arrive this December and is available in 3 colorways: tan and green, blue and white, or the special edition Corey Ellis Galaxy. Regardless of which shoe is right for you, head over to idiosports.com to get yours and use code 6SIDEDDISCS for free shipping today on the only shoes made for disc golf. Huge thanks to Idio Sports for supporting our channel. Now, back to the video. If you've followed this series for any length of time, you've seen me approach these comparisons in a lot of different ways. Sometimes we're trying to see what category a disc falls into. Sometimes we're just comparing flight paths or drawing conclusions from that. But here, I want to be a little bit more personal and analytical. I will be throwing every single one of these 30 approach discs on forehand and backhand, hyzer, flat, and anhyzer. That's 6 different data points per disc. And the order that I'll be throwing them in will be random each time. I'll be approaching this target from about 140 feet or 42.6 meters, which is outside my comfortable putting range. So this is a real scenario where I would choose to use an approach disc instead of one of my putters. I'll be measuring the distance from the basket for each disc on all 6 throws, and quite simply, the disc with the lowest combined distance wins. I'll also be sharing my personal thoughts on these discs as I go and how they sort of interact with the way I throw. And as a quick disclaimer, I personally bag this pink K1 yarn that I've had for over 2 years. So to keep this as fair as possible for the yarn, I've swapped it out for a different yarn that I have not thrown before. Let's kick things off with the disc we have high hopes for, the Axiom Tempo. Rated at 4.4, 2.5, we've talked about the Tempo quite a bit on our channel. It was highly anticipated, but so far it's only been released in special editions. So we'll be testing the same Proton Soft Tempo from previous videos. Now, I actually have wanted to bag the Tempo before, but today I think I definitively learned why it's not finding a spot in my bag. While it delivered 4.92 feet on a forehand hyzer and was the closest disc on my forehand anhyzer round, I found it too shallow for my backhand grip, and it just consistently landed around 20 feet or so. And unless something crazy happens in this video, I will not be taking my Castoplast yarn out of my bag to forehand something else. So with a combined total of 71.73 feet, the Tempo gives us a pretty good baseline to meet for the rest of our discs. Moving on now to a popular release from Discmania and their Finnish star, Nicholas Antala. It is their new approach disc, the Drop. The Drop is one of my favorite new disc names in a long time. Often shouted by players as their approach disc nears the basket, the Drop is rated at 4303 and, surprise surprise, bears some resemblance to the Discraft zone. And honestly, after this experience, I have mixed feelings about the Drop. I love the stamp, I love the plastic, I love the name, but I struggled to get a consistent release, and it was all over the place. My best shot was on backhand anhyzer, putting it just 3.67 feet away. But it also had one of the worst shots of the day, a forehand anhyzer at 44.78 feet. Coming in with a combined total of 128 feet, it was way off the bar set by the Tempo. So let's see if another disc from Discmania can do any better, with the Tactic. The Discmania Tactic has long been a sort of black sheep in Discmania's lineup. A few of their sponsored pros bag one, but we've always struggled to sell them, and I'm not entirely sure why. But surprisingly, this Neo Tactic outperformed the Drop by some distance. I found it particularly accurate on hyzer releases with an 11.56 on backhand and 5.66 on forehand. The Tactic would come in with a respectable 94.78 feet after all 6 throws. Next up is a disc I'm not very familiar with, the Innova Rat. Here in Star Plastic, the Rat is rated at 4203, and it's been around since 2017. But in all that time, the only player I've ever seen throw it is Nate Sexton. And frankly, he could probably forehand just about anything. For me though, the Rat was pretty good. I'm not sure I really noticed it in the moment, but looking back at these numbers, I'm super impressed. Both hyzer shots, as well as backhand anhyzer, were super smooth, no farther from the target than 12.2 feet. In fact, the Rat put up an average distance of just 12.34 feet, just shy of the 11.96 from the Tempo. Good for you, Innova Rat. That's one for the underdogs. I do want to point out there are several metrics that I'll be mentioning today, like total combined distance and average distance, as well as average backhand and average forehand. But don't worry, all of these statistics and the full spreadsheet will be available to you at the link in the video description. Now let's see another disc from Innova with the R Pro Pig. The Pig has dropped a bit in popularity since Ricky Wysocki left Innova for dynamic discs and all that Bitcoin and helicopter rides. But the Pig is a tricky one. Typically available in this sticky R Pro plastic, the Pig has a rhino-like thumb track, a narrow profile, and it actually flew pretty good for me out at Vista del Camino in Arizona while I was on vacation. But how did it do back here at home in the damp late fall weather of Ohio? Not great. The best shot I managed was this floaty forehand anhyzer landing around 12 feet. But every other shot landed beyond 20 feet. And I think it's a combination of the tacky, sticky R Pro plastic, as well as the shape of the Pig itself. We just didn't get along. The Pig had the worst performance so far at over 137 feet. But what all Innova throwers have been secretly hoping for quite some time is their own zone clone. And Innova has finally delivered with the Toro. I'm not a huge zone fan myself, I've never bagged one, but I see the resemblance, and to be honest, whenever I feel a Toro, I'm not disappointed. Rated at 4213, the Toro started out strong, with a 6.8 and 12.7 on backhand hyzer and flat. But on forehand, I could not get a clean release at all. This flat forehand is a great example where it just spit off left of the target and didn't really fade back. The other 4 throws were all over 20 feet as well, leaving it with 124 feet combined total and average around 20.6. And another quick mention on the statistics, that average distance I think is really important, because think about your putting percentage from different distances. If you're 100% from 10 feet, but only 30% from 25 feet, that extra 10 or 15 feet is going to make a huge difference to your actual score. Anyways, let's move on from one zone clone to another and see how I do with the Stokely Thermo Owl. We checked out Scott Stokely's new discs, the Owl, Cardinal, and Wren, in a recent video, and overall I think we were pleased with how they performed. But now that I'm going for accuracy, how will it fare? Well, it's a story of high highs and low lows. My best shot with the Owl was on backhand Anheuser, dropping in right at 7.1 feet. But a forehand Anheuser was way out at 49 feet, which is awful from just 140 feet away. And if there's one thing I'm not super into about the Owl, I think it's the plastic more than the shape. It's just not for me. Next up are a pair of discs that have at least one thing in common, the Lone Star Harpoon and the Westside Harp. But the similarities end immediately after I finish saying their names, because the Harp is a deep, domey, chunky approach disc rated at 4303, and it feels very similar to the Discmania Tactic, which performed well. The Harpoon, on the other hand, has got to be the shallowest approach disc I've ever felt. Now on backhand hyzer, the Harpoon did fine and landed at its closest distance of 8.4. But on forehand, the super shallow rim just fell right out of my hand and landed outside circle 1. The Harp, though, was the same, but different. On a forehand hyzer, which the Harpoon could not handle, the Harp landed just 5.5 feet away. But it had a poor showing on backhand Anheuser, which really hurt its average. The Harp came in with a total of 119 feet to the Harpoon's 132.
We interrupt these approach discs with a special bulletin.
Our Black Friday sale is happening now. With 20% off all Ledgestone discs, all of our custom stamped discs from Prodigy, Millennium, and Discraft, and a select variety of 50 more discs, this is the perfect time to check out our brand new website at sixsideddiscs.com. With our full selection of mystery boxes, discs from over 20 different manufacturers, as well as accessories and apparel and much more, it's the perfect time to stop by sixsideddiscs.com and do the holiday shopping for the disc golfer in your life, even if that's you. Any purchase you make from our website directly supports the content that we create, so thank you so much for your support. Our Black Friday sale ends Monday at midnight, so get your deals while supplies last. Now, back to the approach discs. And straight back into the action, we have another pair of discs, except these ones have a lot more in common. It's the Clash Mint and Peppermint. The Mint is Clash's first overstable approach disc, rated at 4303. And the Peppermint is a cleverly named, slightly more overstable version at 4202. It shares one piece of its name with the Mint, of course, and the rest with the Pepper, a super overstable distance driver. I actually bagged this Mint briefly last year, but it didn't stay in my bag for long, so let's see what kind of showing it can give us today. On a flat forehand, it was parked at 8.4 feet. While this backhand Anheuser was one of my favorite shots all day. And the Peppermint was, perhaps unsurprisingly, quite similar. Despite not doing as well on forehand, it finished with slightly better numbers than the Mint. A pretty good showing from Clash discs. But let's move on to a disc from my own personal collection, stolen right off the shelf behind me. It's a Prodigy A2. Now, I've never thrown this disc, but I keep it around because Six Sided Discs has, for the last almost 3 years, been the proud sponsor of the Disc Golf Club at Ohio State. This A2 is in 750 Spectrum plastic, a somewhat stiff, swirly premium plastic. And on a forehand hyzer, I got a clean release. It's super overstable, so it quickly came to rest just 7 feet from the basket. On backhand Anheuser, the A2 really showed that overstability, quickly flexing back to the basket at 11 feet. But on forehand Anheuser, that stability proved to be too much, carrying it farther and farther from the basket to around 25 feet. Overall, I have to say the A2 was exactly average for me. I didn't love or hate anything about it, and it finished in the middle of the pack around 98 feet combined distance at an average of 16.39. Next up is a disc that I am certain would sell better if they made it in premium plastic, the ThoughtSpace Temple. Rated at 4303, the Temple is only available in Nerve plastic, a soft base plastic. And for that reason alone, it may struggle because I haven't used a base plastic for approaches in a long time. And the only other one in this test so far, the Harpoon, well, it didn't do great. But the Temple, it's a different story. For me, the Temple was nothing if not consistent. 5 of the 6 throws landed between 12 and 17 feet, like this flat backhand at 15, or this flat forehand at 16. But this Temple also managed to pull off the closest shot all day at just 2.4 inches. That's 6.09 centimeters for our overseas audience. That consistency plus one really great shot means the Temple delivers 76.73 combined distance, just behind the Tempo from Axiom. Now we've still got a bunch of discs to go and some exciting ones including several zones, so stick around for that. But first, let's talk about a few discs that didn't quite live up to expectations. For example, the Infinite Raze, which is a deep approach disc, and I have to say, I am not a fan of super deep discs. So while I did okay with it on backhand, it really struggled on forehand. Not to mention the iBlend plastic was super slick in the cold weather. It finished with a combined total of 124 feet. Somehow even less comfortable on forehand was the Infinite iBlend Tomb, which did even worse, with a combined total of over 140 feet. It was very nearly the worst performing disc of the day. One disc that I was disappointed with was the Loft Neon. The Neon's reverse dome and total lack of glide makes it super unique and different. But unfortunately, that also makes it very difficult to throw on the angle that you want, at least for me. With a combined total of 138 feet, the Neon definitely could have done better. This Streamline stabilizer is a disc that I've long wanted to like. I love MVP's plastics, their stamps are always classy, but the stabilizer just doesn't agree with my forehand. And while it wasn't surprising, it wasn't great either. Our last disappointing disc, really, I don't know if you can say it's disappointing because I just didn't have any expectations for it at all. This is the Doomsday Clandestine Area 51. It was extremely shallow, similar to the Harpoon, and its stability alone was perplexing. On a backhand anhyzer, I put a lot of angle on it, and it quickly fought out. But on a forehand anhyzer, even with plenty of height, it had no fight back at all. The Area 51 actually landed outside Circle 1 on 3 of the 6 throws. So its combined total of 154 feet was the worst by far. On the flip side of 5 discs that were a bit disappointing, I have 4 discs that exceeded my expectations. Starting with the Lone Star Copperhead. The last of our base plastic approach discs, the Copperhead is interesting. With a similar shape and thumb track to the Pig, I would have expected to have similar struggles with it. But it's just a touch shallower than the Pig, and as a result, put up some decent numbers. The closest was this forehand anhyzer at 11.9 feet, with the Copperhead finishing with 101 feet combined score. On to another respectable showing. Let's take a look at the MVP Entropy. Here in Neutron Plastic, the Entropy was a mixed bag, but overall, better than I expected. A 6-foot backhand anhyzer, and an 8-foot forehand hyzer offset the unfortunate 42-foot forehand anhyzer, and finished with a decent 104.14 feet. Another disc I would classify as decent-ish is the DGA Breaker. While it didn't work well on my forehand, averaging around 27 feet, the Breaker did very well on backhand, averaging about 15 feet, coming in with a total combined distance of 110 feet. Respectable. But if there's any disc that we threw today that really genuinely caught me off guard, it's a disc that we've thrown before, the Jester Disc Golf Wild Thing. We actually threw the wild thing in several plastics recently, and I found it to be super overstable in every blend. Today we have it in their grippy glow plastic. And while it was pretty dismal for me on forehand, averaging 29 feet, it registered 1.7, 1.97, and 4.52 feet across all 3 backhand throws, making it the most accurate disc that I threw on backhand, period. In fact, I think I'm going to put this wild thing in the bag for a little bit and see if that trend continues. Next up though, let's see the 2 most overstable discs that we threw all day, the Discraft ESP Zone OS and Goliath Discs Pillar. Now these are both discs that we've thrown before, so to a certain extent I know what to expect. But even with those expectations, these were intense. They are also both deeper and chunkier than any other disc that I threw for this test, and as a result, some of the releases were pretty bad. They both did great on hyzer, but not much else. The Zone OS had 104 feet of combined distance, while the Pillar had 103. Next up, we have a pair of rubber discs, the Divergent discs Golem and the recently released Elevation discs Screech. Both rated at 4204, they are actually less alike than you might think. While Divergent's Golem is in a synthetic silicone rubber, this Screech is in Elevation's EcoFlex natural rubber blend, which makes it extremely durable and tacky. And frankly, both of these discs massively exceeded my expectations. Our past experiences with rubber discs are not what I'd call particularly successful, but the Screech did great on backhands, averaging 9.5 feet. But the Golem did even better, with an overall average of 11.79 feet. That was much better than the Screech's 16.9. The only thing that held back either of these discs were forehands, because I don't know, maybe it's just me, but floppy discs on forehand, they don't really work. Now though, let's move on to what many of you have been waiting for, the Discraft Zone. Yes, of course, we couldn't do this test without including the gold standard of overstable approach discs, and to make sure we cover our bases, we're going to include 2, with this recently released seasonal Glow Z Zone, and last year's Adam Hamma's Tour Series ESP Zone. The seasonal Glow Z plastic released in fall of 2024. And while the glow quality may not be consistent as we found in our recent glow comparison, they fly just fine, because this glow zone put up some excellent numbers. It was parked very nearly against the pole at 7 inches on a flat backhand approach, and was in 10 to 15 foot tap-in range on several others. Finishing with a combined total of 98.16 feet, the seasonal Glow Z Zone performed very well, and was definitely in the top 10 overall. And surprise, surprise, the zone is nothing if not consistent, because the ESP Zone also put up some good numbers. 7 feet on a backhand hyzer, 6 feet on a flat backhand. But if I have any complaints, it's that the zone just doesn't feel that good in my forehand grip. But I already knew that. The ESP Zone finished just a tad lower on our list than the Glow Z at 104 feet total. In fact, we were so concerned with including enough zones in this test that I threw in a Zone GT as our next to last disc, which frankly has a very simple story today. It was great on hyzer and bad on everything else, leaving it worse off than either of the other zones at a total distance of 112 feet. So that takes us to our last disc, the winner of this competition, and in hindsight, it is not very surprising that it is the approach disc that I bag, the Castoplast K1 yarn. Now, once again, I'll remind you all that I've been bagging this pink K1 yarn, which has the faintest of puddle tops, since the very first stock release of the yarn in early 2022. I intentionally for this test used a completely different yarn, but that didn't seem to matter because it was the most accurate forehand disc by far, with an average distance of just 5 feet. And that makes sense because that is exactly what I use the yarn for in my bag, forehand approaches. But what the yarn did differently to other discs in our test is it also did pretty good on backhand, even though I never throw my yarn on backhand. It landed at 9.44 feet, 4.13, and 20.32, giving it a backhand average of 11.3, which if we rank all of these discs by average backhand distance, the yarn would finish 7th. But its forehand score was so good, it gives it a final combined distance of 49.08, and it blew the rest of the discs away. The Divergent disc's Golem came in second place over 20 feet back at 70.71, with the Axiom Tempo, the very first disc we saw, in third place with 71.73. As I mentioned earlier, there will definitely be a link to this entire spreadsheet in the video description. I have a lot of thoughts on this test as a whole and several key takeaways that I want to talk about. But the first one is just how valuable practice and experience can be. In the end, I think it makes perfect sense that the disc that I've bagged for almost 3 years was the best performing disc. But I think that would also be true if any one of you watching this did the exact same test and included the mold that you've bagged for a few years. You'd probably have a similar result. In my opinion, what these statistics really show is that the more that you use a disc, the better you get with it. And that's not to say that there isn't some value in trying and experimenting with new discs, but don't give up on a disc just because it doesn't work out after a couple throws. And really take that advice, because that's hard for me to give as somebody who sells discs as their job. What surprised you about all of the discs I tested and how they flew for me? Leave a comment down below. And also comment below what other large-scale comparisons that you want to see here on Flight Numbers Don't Matter. Huge thanks again to Idio Sports for supporting our channel and sponsoring this video. Make sure you go to idiosports.com and use code 6sided to get free shipping on your Syncrasy or Brawlers. And lastly, don't forget to check out our Black Friday sale running now through Monday, December 2nd at 6sided We greatly appreciate your support. For 6sided Discs, I'm Greg. We'll see you in the next one. But if there's any disc that officially... Not bad. But next up, let's take a look right at...
Wild thing.
Ooh, nice.
This flat forehand is a great example where it just
Oh, it's cold and wet. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. See you next time.
If you like this content and want to see more, please consider liking the video, subscribing to our channel, or supporting us on Patreon. Your support makes this content possible.